Chapter 6. Jackson gave Donna a last hug before she got in the car with Annette and Tracy. They had arrived only 20 minutes late to pick up Donna for the cruise. Donna had confided that Annette had told Tracy the cruise left an hour before it did. This way she was certain they would be on time, so in reality the group was ahead by 40 minutes. Something of a minor miracle. He waved as they sped down the driveway. Jackson already had his chores done. He had also called the neighbors and bargained chores and watering the houseplants in exchange for 3 days' help logging in the brush. He had his own suitcase packed and stashed in his closet. Now all he had to do was clean out the fridge to make sure nothing would go bad while he was away. Whistling, Jackson poured the milk down the drain, grabbed a snack for the drive to the airport, loaded his luggage, and locked the house. He dropped off the spare key at the neighbor's, exclaimed over a newborn calf, and declined coffee. Soon he was on his way to the Hawkins farm. Already he could see Rod Temple and his crew setting up for the auction. Driving up the lane, he didn't see Owen Hawkins's truck, but that didn't mean Brant wasn't here. "Rod," Jackson greeted the auctioneer, "have you seen Brant around?" "He's helping to move some smaller items from the garage." Rod tipped his hat back, scratching his forehead a moment. "I asked him to come out to see if there was anything the family might have missed that they would like to keep. Gonna be a hard day for folks." Jackson nodded. "I expect so. I'll go see Brant." Walking into the garage, Jackson found Brant going through a few boxes that hadn't made it to Ma Benson's house during the move. "Jackson," Brant greeted his friend as he shifted a box to the side. "Fine morning for an auction. I expect a lot of people will be out today since the harvest is done." "Need any help?" offered Jackson. "No." Brant shook his head. "I think we got everything yesterday. You sticking around for the auction?" "Nope," replied Jackson. "I have been invited away on a hunting trip. If I want to make it on time, I need to leave in about an hour." "Lucky you," Brant responded easily. He hesitated a moment. "I decided to take you up on that offer of a loan for the ticket money. I'm going to take that job interview. I might not get it, but at least I'll have the experience." "It doesn't have to be a loan," Jackson chided Brant gently. "You can come help out at the farm. I have a few two-person tasks I could use you for if you have the time." "Thanks, Jackson. You're a true friend." Brant gave Jackson a handshake. "You better get going. I would hate for you to be late for your hunting trip." "I will try to bag you a trophy." Jackson felt a little guilty that he wouldn't be here for the auction. It was going to be a difficult time for the Hawkins family, and they could use all the support that they could get. As he was heading back to the truck, Rod stopped him. "Hey, Jackson." Rod nodded at a muddy car and 2 men talking out under the oak tree. "You recognize that man?" "The one with Kirk Vitlin?" Jackson squinted at the pair who were discussing something. It looked like Kirk was getting a little excited. "No, I don't." "Judy said there was a stranger in town yesterday. I wonder if that's him," mused Rod. "Can't be good when a stranger is talking to our local banker." "Maybe he's Kirk's supervisor," surmised Jackson. "Or maybe he wants to buy the place," frowned Rod. He hadn't been given leave to auction off the property, only the contents. The bank wanted to list the property with a real estate agency from Beaufort. "And I guess he won't be a stranger for much longer," Jackson responded as he eyed the fellow in his expensive suit. "He doesn't look like a farmer." "Probably some yuppie from the city bringing out the wife and kids for a vacation home," guessed a frowning Rod. "The good news is that he'll have people employed to keep up the property. The bad news is he's the type to want to update everything. Might even tear the house down." "Someone should get that house declared a historical site," suggested Jackson. While the centuries-old home had an addition or two, it was one of the oldest houses in the area. Under the Hawkins' care, no one had worried about it being torn down. With a new owner, that could change. "I think I'll go introduce myself," decided Rod. "You have a good day, Jackson." Jackson watched Rod go and interrupt the conversation, smoothly inserting himself into the group to get to the bottom of what was going on. Glancing at his watch, Jackson decided he didn't have time to join in the fun. He would have to learn what happened later when he came back from the book tour. Once in his truck, Jackson decided to take a quick pass by Katie's house to make sure that her rust bucket of a car had started this morning. He would hate to have her stranded back in Pendle while he was already halfway to the airport. Katie had told everyone she could that she was going to visit her parents for a few weeks and didn't know when she was going to return. Most people assumed that she was using her parents as a base for hunting for a new job. They couldn't be more wrong. Instead, she would be appearing before all sorts of people, pretending to be someone she wasn't. It was an insane idea. It was her new job, and Katie hoped it would pay the bills. If not, she really would be moving back with her parents and looking for work. Shoving a few last things in an old suitcase, Katie sat on it before zipping it up tight. She had no idea what she might need. How did authors dress? Probably not like the daycare provider that she generally dressed like. It had been a task sorting through her closet for clothes that weren't stained, old, or just too kid-like. Katie hoped her limited wardrobe was up to the task. Grabbing the last of the coffee in a travel mug, she made sure to rinse the pot. Everything was taken care of. Sylvie had a key and would check Katie's houseplants. The heat was set at the bare minimum so nothing would freeze. The fridge had been emptied. Glancing at her watch, Katie grabbed her purse, the suitcase, and coffee, then headed out the door for her car. She tried not to think how she should have taken Jackson's offer to drive. She would make it to the airport in one piece, she assured herself. A few hours later, she pulled up next to Jackson's truck in the large parking lot. He had waited for her, putting a duffel bag over his shoulder and taking her single suitcase. "Ready?" "Sure," Katie forced a smile. "I warn you, I have never flown. I have no idea what it will be like." Jackson shrugged. "I went once for a class trip. It's not a big deal. Mostly it's a little boring because there's nothing to do on the plane." "You're not worried that it's going to crash?" Katie was. She had horrible visions of it falling out of the sky. It would be her luck that would happen the first time she ever tried to fly. If anything, Jackson should be deathly afraid of traveling with Katie by his side. "Planes are safer than cars. It's proven statistically," Jackson responded as they entered the airport. "Besides, who do you know that's ever been in a plane crash versus how many people you know that have been in a car crash?" "Sarah Hawkins was in a plane crash," dryly remarked Katie. "She even survived," Jackson calmly pointed out. There was no point in adding to Katie's reluctance. He hoped she wouldn't have a problem once they actually had to board the plane. It turned out that Jackson needn't have worried about that at all. "Who knew you were on the no-fly list?" Jackson shook his head in disbelief. Once again, Katie's luck had gone bad, and they had been turned away at the airport. The only good news was that they had managed to get their luggage back before it had been sorted to go on the plane. "I still don't understand." Katie watched as he loaded her suitcase into the back seat of his pickup. "I've never flown, and I certainly never broken the law." "I'm pretty sure it's a case of mistaken identity," he said reasonably, even as he was still amazed at Katie's luck. "However, it's going to take a while to get that fixed." "What do we do?" asked Katie. For a moment she briefly wished the tour would be canceled, but she knew that wasn't a good idea. She needed the money, and Jackson needed the publicity. Jackson had seen his mom off with Annette and Tracy just yesterday, so they had a month to make this tour happen before she got home. A neighbor was taking care of chores at the farm, thinking that Jackson was going hunting with friends out of town. It was absolutely fortuitous that this opportunity had landed in her lap, Katie reminded herself. She needed the income. As long as she focused on that particular fact, perhaps she could deal with the nervousness at the thought of pretending to be J.D. Emerson. "You're going to give Andrea a call about this snag in the plans while I drive," Jackson held her door and gave her his cell phone. Me? I've never talked to a publishing agent before, Katy squeaked as she tried to quell the nerves in her abdomen.
Neither have I. We email.
He started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. Muting the music, he instructed her on where to find Andrea's number. Katy put it on speaker and waited. She wondered exactly what she should say. Maybe she should have talked to Jackson first before starting the call. It was too late now. Andrea Schultz? The voice was very businesslike. Good morning, Andrea, responded Katy. She cleared her throat and tried to be a bit more assertive. This is J.D. Emerson. J.D. Andrea's tone warmed. How are things? Well, we hit a bit of a problem. Katy swallowed and glanced at Jackson. Apparently I accidentally got on the no-fly list. What? Andrea asked sharply. There was a pause as Andrea gathered her thoughts. What does that mean for the book tour? How soon can you get to the first booking? Katy looked helplessly at Jackson for an answer. In a response, he shook his head. We are going to miss it, Katy interpreted. We're driving now. Miss it? You can't. You need to get there, Andrea said forcefully. Who is we? Katy swallowed. My friend is with me for support. I will see about rescheduling the first booking for later. Each of these are incredibly important to furthering your career. Are you going to make it to the second one on time? Andrea got right to the point. I'll get a pass for your friend, but he or she will have to stay in the background. Of course he will. Katy looked at Jackson, and he gave a nod. He had better be in the background, in Katy's sight the whole time. She needed to have him there. Otherwise, she might end up hyperventilating or something. We can manage to make the second booking if we don't have any travel issues. Good, Andrea replied tersely. Keep me updated. I will do that. Katy trailed off as she realized Andrea had hung up. She carefully set down the cell phone. Is she usually this abrupt?
She doesn't come across that way over email.
Jackson frowned. He didn't really like the way Andrea had talked to Katy. She might be busy dealing with other authors and the book tour, but that didn't excuse her behavior.
How did you manage over the weekend?
Katy had borrowed Jackson's secret stash of his books and had been reading them. She needed to know everything about them for questions that might come up during the tour. She felt a little overwhelmed. 7 years of writing had created a lot of books. I don't think I'm going to get them all finished. I should probably read while you drive.
You should read the draft of the latest one. Then you can give hints about it.
Jackson pulled around another vehicle to pass.
My laptop is in the back seat.
Katy maneuvered to grab the laptop bag. She had to admit she was a little excited to be the first to see what he had written. Now that she was reading all his books, she had a little different perspective about Jackson. It was funny to think after all these years he managed to keep such a secret from the members of the town. Jackson gave her the code to unlock the screen, and soon she was lost in a new story. It was very good, and she half wished she was the heroine of the tale. An hour later, she looked at the screen in frustration. What happened? Katy looked at Jackson as he drove.
What do you mean?
He asked as he glanced at Katy. There's a blank space. Then it goes to another scene. It jumps from one part of the story to the next, complained Katy. It happened at such a crucial point in the story, too.
I deleted that, Jackson answered. Remember the book club my mom hosted?
Sure. Katy frowned in confusion. She really didn't see what that had to do with anything. What about it?
There were some remarks about how sometimes some of the more intimate scenes are a little stilted or awkward. I reread what I had written for this book, and I agree.
Jackson merged onto the highway.
I deleted the scene, and I'm going to rewrite it. Unfortunately, I'm finding it a little difficult.
Didn't you say this was due this week? She questioned. How was he going to get it done on time, she wondered. There was so much going on, now that they had added driving to their destination to the list.
It is. However, I want to get the book done right. He slowed with the rest of traffic as they entered a construction work zone.
Aren't you worried about making the deadline?
Katie couldn't imagine having to deal with deadlines. It was hard enough to pay her bills on time. To actually have a project done on a specific date? Katie didn't think she could do it. A little, he shrugged, seemingly unworried about it. Especially now that we have to drive instead of fly. But once I get it figured out, I can type pretty fast. The problem isn't the specifics of writing what I want to happen. It's more figuring out how to convey what's supposed to be the magic of the moment.
Supposed to be the magic? Don't you think there is magic in the first kiss? Curiously asked Katie. She always felt there was magic in the first kiss of relationship. There was so much promise in a first kiss. Would it live up to expectations? Would it set the tone for the relationship? It was one of the most anticipated milestones of a new couple. Katie wondered how kissing Jackson would be. Her breath hitched at the thought.
I've always found first kisses to be a bit of a disappointment, remarked Jackson. I guess because you build something up in your mind, it's never quite how you imagined.
You are a first kiss cynic, she said in surprise. I would never have guessed.
A first kiss cynic? Is there even such a thing? Jackson was amused by the idea. He had an involuntary smile. Only you would come up with such a title.
I bet you think you know how the relationship is going to turn out by the first kiss. Katie leaned back to study him. Jackson was surprised by her observation. I try not to judge by the first kiss. Keyword try, which means you do judge by the first kiss, she said in satisfaction that he had validated her point. No wonder you're not married.
Maybe I just haven't found the right person yet. He calmly tossed back the cliché. You're not married either. Who are you to judge?
I don't judge by first kisses, retorted Katie. She also hadn't found anyone who measured up to the man beside her, but she wasn't about to tell Jackson that. I judge by actions done in the relationship.
Okay, so what if the first kiss was absolutely awful? Like full-on disgusting. Are you going to give him a second chance to see what kind of guy he is? Jackson warmed to the debate. He was blatantly curious to find out what she would say.
Maybe.
Probably not, she silently admitted. Then again, it wasn't like she had dated a lot.
He might be an amazing guy.
Who is a terrible kisser, which to most people would be a deal-breaker, he pointed out.
True, but is it really okay to judge someone by the first kiss? Maybe they were nervous. Maybe the next kiss will be better. She looked at the passing scenery, and Jackson wondered again about the mystery man in Katie's life. She hadn't mentioned anyone, nor had she said anything about the results of the pregnancy test. He had asked a few people if Katie was seeing anyone, and no one seemed to know anything, which made Jackson wonder. He had thought about asking Trent, or a few of Katie's friends, but he reasoned that if he did that, people might think he was interested in dating her. Which he wasn't.
Have you ever had a first kiss that didn't measure up, and then found a second kiss that was better?
Jackson asked to keep the debate going. Maybe Katie would let something slip about the baby's father. Not really. Then again, I haven't had any earth-shattering kisses either, admitted Katie. She had always assumed that kissing Jackson would be an earth-shaking experience. She wondered if he would live up to the hype that she had built up in her mind.
Those only exist in romance books, he told her dismissively, like love at first sight. It just doesn't happen in real life.
How do you know? People say they've experienced it, Katie responded. Not everyone would make that up.
Do you really know anyone who has experienced it? Name someone from Pendle as an example.
Jackson countered her argument. Katie paused, thinking.
You can't think of anyone, can you? He said smugly. That's because people fall in lust at first sight, not love. Love is something that takes time to build.
What about your dad? Katie questioned. She had heard the story from Donna so many times. Your mom always says that he loved her at first sight.
He took one look at her and got down on one knee right there proposing to her. She turned him down, remember?
He didn't know anything about her, huffed Jackson. It's a cute story, but I don't think it really happened the way my mom tells it.
Are you saying your mom has been lying all these years? Katie asked sweetly, determined to trap him in his own argument.
No, I'm saying she has an idealistic view of the incident. He backtracked a little. She accepted Dad's romantic story that he fell in love at first sight, but the reality is he had no clue about her personality, her likes and dislikes, if they would even suit as a couple. He just saw a girl that he thought looked nice and did an outlandish gesture to make sure that she remembered him.
Wow, that's sad that you're so cynical, responded Katie. And you're the romance writer.
Romance writing is fantasy. Anything can happen there. He shrugged. I just write gushy stuff and the ladies like it.
I just think it's tragic that you feel that way. Katie was a little disappointed in him.
Most guys feel that way, shrugged Jackson.
He understood that she was a little unhappy with him, but he wasn't going to lie.
Sorry to break it to you.
Maybe it's just because you haven't been in love, she mused. If you experienced love, you might feel differently.
Maybe.
Jackson doubted it. He had a more practical approach to his emotions. To his way of thinking, people chose who they fell in love with. They also chose how much effort to put into the relationship, how much commitment they were willing to make to keep the relationship going. They also chose to fall out of love. Yes, he wrote cheesy romance novels. But Jackson didn't believe everything he put down on paper. He was just fulfilling his readers' expectations. Take, for example, the type of woman who wanted a man to get her flowers, not because she wanted the flowers, but because she wanted him to want to get her the flowers. How messed up was that? Men didn't think that way. If a woman wanted flowers, she should just say so, and a man will get them for her. Jackson didn't pretend to have mind-reading powers. Although he was in for a heap of trouble if he ever did start dating any girl seriously, and she found out about him being J.D. Emerson, she might expect all sorts of romance from a romance writer. Jackson frowned. That was a complication he hadn't really thought of before. Do you think that just because I write romance novels that I would be more romantic in nature? He asked Katie. Jackson wanted to confirm his thought that this was probably the truth, at least among women. I think any woman would have that idea, Katie responded honestly. You are writing books that speak to the romantic ideals in our hearts. Crud, Jackson thought to himself. Some woman was going to be very disappointed that he wasn't a dance, give flowers, and spout poetry sort of guy. He decided to change the subject. I saw Kirk Vitlin out with some guy at the Hawkins place before the auction today. That's Kirk, making sure he gets his money, sighed Katie. She didn't like Kirk. He had hit on her on more than one occasion, even though he wore a wedding ring. Kirk said something about having an open relationship with his wife. Katie didn't care. She was not that type of girl. He was also known as a tightwad. Kirk did his best to let others pay for his meals in town. It became a known fact at the bakery and diner that if Kirk sat down at your table, make sure you made it very clear you weren't paying to the waitress. The guy had an expensive suit on, commented Jackson. We were thinking it might be Kirk's supervisor or a buyer for the farm. Already? Katie was surprised. I wasn't aware that the bank had even advertised it through the real estate company yet. I didn't see a for sale sign when I was there. He shrugged. I suppose they could have put an ad online or in a newspaper. Katie frowned. I ran into a stranger at the gas bar yesterday. He had on an expensive suit and was driving a red rental vehicle. Jackson listened as Katie described the fellow she spilled coffee on. That sounds like him. The car had a lot of mud on it and looked like the bumper was dented. I wonder if Dixby got him lost. Katie grinned. It was a game that some of the locals played with strangers who weren't gracious about asking directions. They would give verbal or written instructions that were so difficult to understand that eventually the stranger would give up and ask the local to come with and take them to whoever they were trying to visit. Dixby Cooley was especially good at making a 10-minute drive last 2 hours for any rude strangers passing through. While the town didn't get strangers all that often, invariably they did get lost, since the GPS maps of the area weren't correct. Finding a place on Main Street or nearby, the GPS was okay. However, some models would take a person miles out of the way when it was an address in the surrounding countryside. It was a glitch in the system that hadn't been fixed.
"It looks like Dixby took him through fair weather."
Jackson smiled back, glad to have Katy happy again after their more serious discussion about romance. She really did have a nice smile, he thought. He probably did go down Fairweather, agreed Katy with a laugh. Fairweather Road was a gravel road that could only be used during a stretch of the fair weather. Otherwise, there was a soft patch near the bush area that got very muddy when it rained or snowed. Since it had just rained 2 days ago, they could assume that the sun hadn't dried out the soft area enough to prevent a very muddy ride for anyone driving through. It was one of the quirks that all the locals knew about, and it never got fixed because there just wasn't any money. A few times the town had tried to resolve the problem with a couple of loads of gravel, but the ground had just seemed to swallow it up, continuing to bring up the mud. Woe to the stranger that didn't know about Fairweather. They stopped for supper at a little restaurant on the highway. Jackson footed the bill, telling Katy to order anything she wanted. You might regret that. Katy looked at the menu. It was more expensive than the diner in Pendle. Plus, they had some great-looking desserts. They ordered, and Jackson was happy to see that Katy wasn't skimping on her meal. He appreciated a woman that would eat in front of a man rather than make him pay for her when she wasn't planning on eating a quarter of what touched her plate. Maybe his mother was right. Katy did look a little thin. For the next month, Jackson intended to make sure she ate well. It was the right thing to do, he told himself. Katy could be expecting and needed all the nutrients she could get. They enjoyed the meal, chatting about how far they would get before needing to sleep for the night. Jackson felt it would be cutting things a little close. Normally, he would suggest that they switch off driving, but Jackson was a little worried that Katy might be tired. That was also the reason Jackson was willing to sleep at a motel for a few hours before driving again, rather than driving the entire night long. "This is so good," Katy said a few hours later as Jackson drove. She had a small take-out container with what she hadn't managed to polish off from her dinner, plus a piece of chocolate fudge cake that Jackson had insisted she have since he was having pie. She closed her eyes and savored the taste of the cake. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive?" "I'm good," replied Jackson. "I'll let you drive tomorrow when I get tired." "Do you want a bite of cake?" She offered to share the dessert, sparing another bite on the plastic fork. "Sure." Jackson wasn't about to turn down a sweet. He enjoyed them far too much. It was a good thing he never seemed to gain any weight. Katy held out the fork so that he could pop the dessert into his mouth without taking his hands off the wheel. "That is good," Jackson said as he chewed. "Now you're regretting that pie," Katy said wisely. "Always go for the chocolate cake." "I don't know about that," he replied. "The cherry cream pie was excellent." "Better than chocolate cake?" Katy wouldn't believe it. She took another bite for herself. "I might need another sample to decide," Jackson grinned. Katy rolled her eyes, but allowed him another bite. "Just this one. The rest is mine." Jackson was reminded of their childhood when all the kids used to grouse over who would get the last piece of dessert. Eventually his mother would cut it up equally for them, while his dad threatened to eat the last piece on them if they couldn't find a way to get along. It had all been in good fun. There were a lot of childhood memories with Katy in them. She practically lived at their house, following Trent around. They had been in all sorts of trouble together. He was glad that Katy was helping him out now. Jackson trusted her to see this through and never reveal his secret. In fact, the only person he trusted more was his mother, Jackson thought in surprise. Jackson mulled over the idea. He supposed he trusted Katie because she had always proven herself to be trustworthy. She knew many silly secrets from her childhood and had never once said a word to anyone. He hadn't spent as much time with her since she went away to college, but he still felt that she was dependable and would never intentionally tell anyone that he was J.D. Emerson. Glancing over, he saw that she had fallen asleep. She was still sleeping when he reached the motel. Jackson was reluctant to leave her alone in the locked truck, yet he was loath to disturb her. Didn't expectant mothers need extra sleep? He really didn't know. After checking in and getting 2 rooms on the ground floor, he pulled the truck up to the door of one of the rooms. Getting out, Jackson came around to Katie's side and carefully opened the door. "Katie?" She continued to slumber on. Grimacing, Jackson undid Katie's seatbelt. She didn't even flinch. Jackson remembered how Katie could sleep through almost everything as a child. Apparently, she was still a heavy sleeper. Jackson eyed her. Katie wasn't heavy, and the door wasn't that far away. Gently putting her arm around his neck, he scooped her up, closing the truck door with a foot. He walked towards the door of the motel room, key in hand so that he could easily open it. "Freeze!" A man came out of the shadows holding a gun. "Stay where you are!" A couple more emerged from the side of the building. "Police!"
Isn't it getting exciting? Look for next week's chapter on YouTube. Happy listening.